Well, hello everyone. My name is Ryan Burke. I'm a senior partner at Leadership and Design, and I'm here with Remington Holt, and I'll let Remington introduce himself in just a second. But we're here having a conversation on the topic. L&D each month has decided to theme our newsletter this year, the unspeakables. And so the first month was fear. The second month, which we're in right now, the month of October, is cancel culture. And we are preparing for the third month, which is going to be whiteness and kind of on a larger scale, race. And so we wanted to introduce the topic of whiteness and race as an unspeakable via this conversation that Remington and I are going to have today. And fair warning that the conversation about whiteness and race is a conversation that Remington and I have been involved in for about 6 months. And so really our only goal today is to really just introduce this idea that there are certain things that are unspeakable. And one of those, massive issues that, not just Remington and I are wrestling with, but, the whole country's wrestling with is around whiteness and race. And so we hope you enjoy. So Remington, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, my name is Remington Holt. I am the CEO and founder of Remington Holt Consulting. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, particularly for schools. And I, come from a long line of educators and education jobs. I was a middle school teacher. My undergrad is in elementary ed. My master's is in special ed. But my experiences in, race and teaching Black and brown kids and living in spaces myself that were not considerate of my life and my culture. And so, that's why I made the decision to start consulting in terms of DEI, because there are so many schools that just don't know how to do this work. And it's more important now than ever, which I'm sure could have been said about race at any point in the United States. So maybe it's not more important now than ever, but now we're doing it. So here we are.
Yeah, and I think by way of introduction as well, I met Remington working on a project in Nashville, Tennessee, where Remington is from, and he said two things that really got my attention. The first thing he said is that his experience is that white people can sometimes spend an entire day and be really tired at the end of the day without having done anything. And that had me reflecting on number one, that I don't think anyone had ever put it to me that directly. And then also, even though I don't want that to be true, it sort of resonated as true in the sense that there's a lot of talk, but not necessarily much real action or change in terms of some of the things that we're wrestling with as it relates to race. And the other thing that Remington said that had me really reflecting is he told me about his experience going to college at a well-respected university that, quote unquote, would be, high quality secondary education. And what he said that got my attention was this idea that he went through a 4-year degree, and each day was a new experience, hearing things that there was no evidence in his real life that any of what was being talked about was true. And that just got me thinking, like, what it must be like to go through, a secondary education where people are telling you, college professors with PhDs are telling you what's true, and you can't see any evidence in real life that what somebody is telling you is true is actually true. And so that just got me really thinking about, my own experience and how different it was. And so, we've been in this 6-month-long conversation. And so we wanted to introduce this week's or this month's topic, which is, why is race so unspeakable? Or why is being white and whiteness in schools and its impact on both white children and Black and brown children, why is that so unspeakable? And so I wonder, Remington, if I would just pose that question to you, Like, how would you answer that?
My reason is that I feel like whiteness is unspeakable because it's like oxygen. We don't talk about breathing until we can't. Um, it's just something that happens in the background. It's our operating system. It's what's considered to be normal. Like even as a Black person, my world is riddled with and shaped by white supremacy and white value, like the white value system. And like not to alarm anyone with the word supremacy, but like white supremacy just meaning that whiteness is the status quo, like whiteness is better than everything else. And so like if I think about the university that I went to, the way all of my professors were white, and they have this co-signing by their PhDs, by the university, by all these research journals, that the things that they say are just true. And not only are they true, and we use this word all the time, best practice. This is the best thing you can do for kids. And everything they told me had nothing to do with the type of kids that I wanted to teach. So it was best practice for white kids. And that's fine if part of the program is like, this is best practice for this group, this is best practice for this group, this is best practice for this group. But it's like, nope, whatever's best for white people, that's just the best. It's like that was my entire undergrad. We don't need to mention anyone else. This is the best because it works for us. um and so I think that's the one thing that I always say about like a way that I know a system is really effective is if you don't have to think about it and it continues to return on its investment. And so like whiteness has done that. Like whiteness is a very well built system to where you just don't have to think about it. It just is like, and we, even as a Black person, I perpetuate whiteness because it's normal. It's normative in the United States. And so I think that's why it's unspeakable, because it's been put in this place of normalcy where normal things don't need to be spoken of.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. This idea of you don't think about breathing until it's not working. And so, as I was reflecting on that question of what makes whiteness so unspeakable, I have several answers. I think part of it is habit. So if as I reflect on my upbringing as a white person, no one ever asked me to speak about it. You know what I mean? I think it was, I was I mean, I don't even remember this being a topic professionally in my career until the last 8 to 10 years.
Mhm.
And so, in some ways, it wasn't until I met a diversity director at the first independent school that I worked at who was pushing the conversation and forcing me to reflect on that aspect of my professional life.
Mhm.
And so I think there's such a habit of, like what you said, right? I mean, just one way of doing things being normative and not even questioning that. And the second thing is, just almost debilitating fear on the part of white people that talking about it is going to lead to some unscripted moment where I am going to say something that is deemed, I mean, you fill in the blank, racist, uneducated, ridiculous, embarrassing. So I feel like part of what makes it unspeakable is the same thing that perpetuates like, it's almost like a paradox, which is that like it's unspeakable because these things that make it unspeakable also make it harder to speak about. And so it's like we get into this sort of like cycle where the same thing that makes it hard to talk about also reinforces why it's hard to talk about. And so I
Mm.
think, like, as you and I enter into this conversation, um, I'm curious from your perspective, are there levers that have worked to unlock kind of getting the ball rolling?
In terms of like getting a conversation started with, like, I won't say a stranger, but someone who's new to the topic. Is that what you mean?
I don't know. I mean, like, it's unspeakable. We don't want it to be unspeakable. We need to talk about it. White people have their own fears about talking about it. Black and brown people might have different fears, or reluctance to talk about it. I'm just curious, what do we do?
I even think I just had this thought. Whiteness is unspeakable to white people. It's not unspeakable to anyone else. And so, like, even, even the theme of whiteness being unspeakable is very white. Like, I don't know of anyone else who would say that whiteness is unspeakable except a white person. So, like, we talk about it all the time. Like, I have never not talked about whiteness. I remember recognizing, so I grew up on welfare and I was raised by my great grandmother. And every year, like, my great grandmother had custody of me. She was 67 when I was born or something like that. And so every year, a white woman would come to our house and make sure and like interrogate her about what she's doing with the welfare money so that she doesn't lose us as children. Or, like, she had to come up with all these like receipts and all these different things. And it's like the white woman knows what we should be doing. And my great grandmother has to prove that she's doing it to keep the kids. And so it's like, I have never, and I remember at a very young age, like maybe as early as like kindergarten, knowing when the white lady was coming over to the house, because my great grandmother's whole demeanor changed and she would start like nervous cleaning things. Um, and like, so I I struggle with this idea on the whole that whiteness is hard to talk about. I think anything is hard to do if you never do it. And so, like, I think it's important for white people to acknowledge that this is not so much hard to talk about as it is unpracticed. Um, and so, like, I don't know. And I get that there is an inherent difficulty about um facing your own shit and dealing with your own problems, but like that's just that's just not an excuse. Like, I know so many kids, children of color at the schools that I used to teach at, who have by the age of 10 raised an entire family, learned to take care of themselves, XYZ. Like, that stuff is hard, but not to them. It's just normal because they just did it. They practiced it. It was a part of their daily life. So they just did it. Um, and so I think one of the things that gets the ball rolling is to not like lead with fear. Like, yeah, it's scary to do something new, but like that's the ROI of fear. As long as you're afraid, you won't practice. So therefore, you'll never do the thing that you're trying to do. Another good system, fear is a good hands-off, high return system, because the things that you need to do to confront it cost you a lot, you know? And so I think one of the things that white folks can do to get this ball rolling is just pay the cost up front. Say, I don't know what I am unpracticed at this. And so I'm likely going to mess up. I'm going to sound ignorant. I don't know stuff. And like, will you have the grace to explain it to me? Like, that's one of the things that gives me more power to have these conversations, when a white person leads with their authentic level of understanding. because then I get to choose, do I have time and emotional space to have this conversation with you today? And
Mm.
if not today, I can do it later. But like a lot of a lot of white folks, just like, especially in this current socio-political climate, just see black and they're like, oh, I have so many questions, let me just start talking. It's like, no, that's not how this works. So
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just said, I think just resonates in general with what we've seen at Leadership and Design with any new practice, which is that there is such dogma around all sorts of different topics and so much conversation, so much debate. Is it innovative? Is it not innovative? Is it best for kids? Is it not best for kids? But it really just comes down to people not feeling comfortable with new behaviors that they haven't spent time practicing. And almost would say unequivocally that at L&D, the only thing that we've seen help people evolve is practice and creating these sort of lab environments, these studio environments where, kind of like your language, where you're kind of paying those costs up front, which is we're just going to do the work and we're going to worry about the evolution later. And so I think that's a nice segue into this conversation. So obviously, one of the main reasons we wanted to focus the newsletter on topics that are being overlooked is we just want to do that. And as I said earlier, you and I have been having this conversation for 6 months, trying to figure out what we could build together that would help primarily white institutions, schools, engage on a level that is deeper than surface and not really about sort of checking the box training, but how can you really engage in this kind of work in a way that doesn't lead to a great conversation but no actual evolution or change for the system. And so one of the things we've been experimenting with, for those of you that are watching this, is engaging in a dialogue by sharing media together. And so Remington and I wanted to do a little bit of that today, just to model some of the things that we're trying out. And so Remington has a clip that he's brought. I haven't seen it. I don't know what he's going to share. I actually have 2 clips that I brought, and he doesn't, neither of us have shared those with each other. And so, the hope of sharing the media is that we're exploring different aspects of culture, and then also just helping sort of move the conversation into areas that we may not plan on, but sort of help us explore these issues. And so, Remington, I don't know if you want to go first and share the media, or you tell me how you want it to go when you're sharing your clip.
I was wondering the same thing just now. Is there a way, do you have like a topic? Can you say a topic of what your clips are on without giving them away, so
Yeah,
we can figure out what order?
I have 2 clips.
Okay.
One is a clip of 5 teachers with a moderator that are talking about race.
Oh
And
my.
I clipped the particular clip that I was going to show again, because we like the segment that I am clipping from is an hour long, and so
Okay.
the portion that I'm going to share is only a couple minutes long. But it was just a segment of conversation which is about the challenges that are happening in schools with teachers in terms of doing the work of having this conversation about race. So that was one clip.
Okay.
The other clip is actually from CNN, and it's a group of 6 high school students.
Hmm.
It's a stretch to say that what they're doing is having a conversation. I think they're having what I would call more of a versation, which is they're each talking. And
Okay.
I don't know, I wouldn't say that what they're doing is talking to each other. But the reason I wanted to share that clip was more about, for me, highlighting the impact of what happens in our country when we as educators don't engage
Mm.
in this conversation, and how that then shows up in young people. I mean, a high school student is a young adult. And so I just thought it would be interesting to juxtapose the conversation that young people are having. And again, it's just one small conversation. It's a little contrived because it's on CNN. And then the conversation, which is less contrived, but still a little bit contrived, right? Because it's still online being viewed by people between educators. So that's kind of what I've got.
I think we should start with your first clip, and then I think my clip would go second, and then I think it sounds like a good idea to round out if we have time with the CNN conversation. My clip is on this idea. It's actually from my podcast. Funny enough, we just did an episode. My podcast is Two Teachers and a Mic, streaming on all streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud. Find it if you want. We just did an episode called Say Her Name in honor of Breonna Taylor. And, to highlight the injustices that have been going on with her case. And I introduced me and my co-host Helene. We talk about this idea of the false binary that seems to be like quintessential to the maintenance of whiteness and white supremacy. That like everything has to fall on one side. It's either black or white. It's either red or blue. It's either that there's no nuance to life. And so like that's what my clip is kind of centered on. So I think it would be cool to see this more familiar, more moderated thing first with the teachers, and then we can kind of transition into Two Teachers and a Mic, because we're a little unfiltered on my show. So, don't want to scare anybody off.
Well, great. Okay, so I will share my screen here and we can watch this. And again, as people are watching this recording of Remington and me, we are working out kind of how we work with media. And so we leave it unscripted as to whether or not we're going to pause the recording. And so Remington, I'll let you decide as you're watching this clip. If you've got something to say, just signal me and I'll pause the video.
Okay.
But the whole purpose of sharing it is not to just have you watch the clip, but it's to provoke dialogue. And so I'd love to know as you're watching it if you've got something to say. So feel free to just let me know.
Okay.
YouTube channel or any of these individual teachers, but I believe they're all public school teachers. And so that's kind of as much information. If you want to go check it out, you can obviously go check it out.
Of teaching is it seems like teachers are more than willing to like run ourselves in circles to do something for Black History Month or do something for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are willing to talk about other cultures, but we do not talk about the history of white people. I mean, I know that we say that like our history books are from the perspective of like rich white men, but we do an excellent job of erasing actual white people from all of the struggles in our history books. So when we look at the civil rights movement, who was Martin Luther King marching against? We have no idea. He's just marching out there in the streets, like just against buses. Like there are no people that we ever identify to show like who he's fighting against. We teach about slavery. I've seen plenty of teachers do all of these exercises where they want to like humanize enslaved people and like talk about their day and their cabins and all kinds of stuff. What about the enslaver? What about the person who's managing all of this? We don't ever learn about that kind of stuff. So it's impossible for people to draw a straight line from a slave owner to someone who passed Jim Crow legislation to police brutality today to us, to teachers. We can't see that. And we can do as much. Like I know that we have good intentions, and I definitely do this as well, but we're trying to like instill like cultural pride in our students, and they can go to Harvard and become a bird watcher, and they go to Central Park and a white lady's still going to call the cops on them for telling her to put her dog on a leash. Like we've got to address the white violence and the white supremacy in our country immediately because people are dying.
You just detail what white supremacy is, though. When we're whitewashing our history, when we're afraid to address who the perpetuators of these oppressions were because of white guilt, because we don't want to make white students feel uncomfortable or white teachers feel uncomfortable in school, damn that comfortability. Like, that's why we have the issues that we have now, where everyone feels like they can disconnect from what's happening. Like, oh, it's not me. Well, you may not have put your hand on it, but you benefit from the outcome of it and you don't speak against it. And then when you have the opportunity to amplify those people who are around you that you so-called love, you're quiet. And honestly, none of this stuff is even going to matter, especially when it comes to education, until white teachers hold white teachers accountable. Racism ain't our problem. It's not Latanya's problem. It's not Naomi's problem. It's not my problem. It's your community's problem. It's going to take you guys to deal with it. I can't stop a white person from thinking or saying the things that they're saying behind closed doors, but y'all are there. Y'all hear them. And until you guys are being very intentional about a call to action for white educators across this country to get the hell off the sidelines and step their asses up and do what they got to do to help our kids feel affirmed when they can do what they got to do. So y'all don't understand, like, when our kids get suspended, they say average kid, if you get suspended at least 5 days during your entire career in school, you are 50% more likely to drop out. Every single day, these kids get suspended for bullshit. Every time we send our kids off on nonsense, like, we are setting them up for failure. And it starts with those small, just kicking them out of the class in 5th grade stuff. Then that turns into the suspending them stuff, and the expelling them stuff. And then now that kid, you know, he can't get a high school degree, and he's working some BS job, and he got to keep the lights on. So now he's selling drugs or doing crime or doing whatever to try to survive. And then now he's criminalized. Like, we set these things up from the get-go, and which is why we have to identify these biases and these racial microaggressions that happen with our kids at a young age, and it's going to take y'all.
Right, especially being that we make. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, like, especially being that white teachers make up about 80% of the teaching population, right? Like, so especially, like, we have the moral obligation to teach our students, especially our white students and our white teachers, white staff members, the importance of our history and the oppression and injustices that are still present today. Because without us doing that on a regular basis, and not, you know, like the pop-up PDs here and there, or the pop-up conversations once, you know, every 4 months, then nothing is going to change.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. So yesterday I posted on Instagram because I really thought, you know what, like, out of survival, a lot of Black people have done such a phenomenal job of just making it seem like everything we've accomplished and everything we've done has just been so easy. Latanya went to high school, Latanya graduated, she went to college, she got a master's, but I'm never really telling my white friends all the little things that have been said to me, done to me, that I'm just pushing through because I'm trying to just get the stuff done. And so we've allowed some people to be lulled into this idea that everything's fine because look at what you've done. All you and your siblings have gone to college. You bought a house, you've done this, you've done that, because I'm not sitting down and sharing the details of how I felt when my professor showed me the bell curve and said, why are you trying to do any better? Because this is where you're supposed to be. But I talked to a friend of mine last night because someone DM'd me 2 posts that 2 teachers on Instagram had made about, one was, this is why I haven't posted anything about Black Lives Matter. And one had posted Black Lives Matter. And then in the same breath, posted a picture of her police officer husband and said, but his life does too. And so when I'm talking to my white friend about it, because I basically said, you need to get your girl. Like, you need to talk to her because I can't. Like, I cannot explain to her, apparently, why that's not okay. And so my friend was trying to justify, well, I think she's looking out for her husband, or, well, at least she said she's reading. And I said, I understand that. But for me, it bothers me because, like you said, most teachers are white. I said, so imagine if she's teaching Black and brown students, and we already know most teachers that are white, that means there's never going to be a time for some of those students where they even have a person that looks like them, that is telling them that you matter, that you're valued, that we got you. And then they're going to have white teachers that will never, ever say anything to speak out against just things that are happening in society. And it matters. Like, and I keep saying, like, I grew up very middle class, not in any sort of urban area, haven't even experienced the same level of discrimination that some of my relatives have. And these little things that I experienced in my very middle class upbringing, they all stick. And I said, and that builds up for students. And if there's never a teacher in their life, just for the sheer demographics of the teaching staff, that is telling students of color, we value you, we see you, just imagine what that feels like, that you're not being motivated or reassured or instilled certain thought processes about yourself while in school, you know? And so
That is so hard for me to believe and to tolerate. Like this is something I've been talking about maybe for the last like couple of weeks, is that I am newly learning how little white people know about race. And like when I look at and maybe it comes up in my clip, but like Breonna Taylor's death, murder occurred because of a no-knock warrant. When I hear the three words no-knock warrant back to back to back, the first thing I imagine is a white man busting into some slave quarters and rounding up some slaves. It's the first thing I imagine. When I see the prison industrial complex, how do you not see slaves? The prisons are owned by white people. They're majority populated by black people. The black people are literally in chains and cages. How do you miss that? Like, and I even think about, this is I don't want to say it's a stretch, but it's controversial. The NFL and the NBA, all the owners are white and all the players are black. How do you miss that? It's like, it's so hard for me to understand and I guess this means whiteness is doing its job. But like, white people are living in a world where things that are so obvious are just missed by them. And that is news to me, that this is hard to understand, that it's hard to connect slavery to Jim Crow, to poll watchers, to Trump's America. Like, it seems like a very traceable common thread to black folks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's hard. I just think the point that I think she was making, that I agree with, is it's not taught.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
you know, like, your experience of it is not the common experience for white people growing up.
Yeah.
And if it was your experience, I agree with you, right? It's not hard. It doesn't feel like a complicated thing when it's presented in that way, but it's not.
So can you give me more insight on like the point the girl made in the bottom left about how they're like, who is Martin Luther King Jr. marching against? How does that, like, how do you process that as a white person? Like, when you learned about the civil rights movement, did you put yourself there? Did you put your parents there? Did you put your grandparents there? Like, 'cause a lot of white people's parents and grandparents were the ones MLK was marching against. So like, do white people put themselves as the antagonist in history and then relate you? Like, do you like, oh, that could have been my grandma? You know what I'm saying? how does that happen for you? How did it happen for you?
That's a good question. How did that happen? I mean, I think I grew up in a household where, for me at least, it was wrong to, well, first, two things. Number one, it was not allowed in my household to discuss ththings that were societal or political without depth and nuance, right? So I came from a Norwegian family, and like a Norwegian value system is that the dinner table is very political. It's kind of the opposite of like maybe the way that we experience this in America right now, where it's like two things off the table: religion and politics. So like the elders in my experience were very much like, you needed to sit at the table as a young person and actually be involved in these discussions. But in terms of those issues, I don't really remember as a young person those issues being discussed in specificity. So like when I remember learning about civil rights, well, I went to a school that gave me a bad education. So like they were asking me to memorize things and take tests. I wasn't wrestling with anything. So it wasn't until I had kids and families as a teacher in my classroom that I was really forced to wrestle with what it looked like in real life to have any of these issues come up. And so I don't even really feel like I can answer that question, because it just, when I hear that woman talking about, we never actually talk about those people, what resonates for me is it's so true that my education experience just didn't involve saying any, like even when you just said right there, you just said take the NFL and the NBA. That makes perfect sense to me, but no one in my world would say that. So white people aren't walking around and making the connection explicitly between slave owners and slaves and the NFL owners and NFL players. It's not that I don't see it. It's not that I don't even agree that it's easy to make that connection. It's just not being, again, it's unspeakable. And you said earlier, like the unspeakable part is it's a white concept. That resonates with me. And even this, in the upper right-hand corner, racism isn't our issue. What that made me think of is, how do you deal with a problem where the impact impacts a particular group of people, but it's not their issue? Most of the time when let's say something is my issue to deal with, most of the time there's some impact on me. And so it strikes me as kind of an interesting situation, which is, okay, here we are forced in education with, it's really white people holding other white people accountable and engaging in a conversation that's very uncomfortable for us to do. It's our issue. We have to do it. But the impact of us not doing it disproportionately does not impact us in the same way that it does other people. I can't think of any other issue like that.
I mean, I think about right now the stimulus package. Like I put in, I think our government is crafted that way. Like the fact that everyone in Congress is wealthy and lifelong employed, and they're voting on how to support poor people who are involuntarily unemployed. Like, I think it's a pretty common thread for white folks to make decisions about things that they don't have to reap the consequences of. Like that was the whole model of almost every charter school that I've ever seen.
Right. And that reminds me of Brian Stevenson, who he gave a talk at NAIS one year, and the thing that really stuck with me is if you want to deal with whatever issue it is, his issue obviously was the prison system. That's what he spent his career dealing with. He said you have to get proximate.
Yep, and I remember that.
His whole point was you can't understand something that you're not proximate to. And that strikes me as a huge barrier. Is that the whole structure is built to insulate people
Yeah.
from proximity.
Yeah. And I think whiteness heavily encourages that. Like, I just think about the suburbs. Like, I want to live in the city of Chicago, but not in the city of Chicago. I want to live in Nashville, but I don't want to have anything to do with Nashvillians. Like, like white people are really good at distancing themselves in a way that comforts them, and then they just export their job or their power into places. So they don't ever have to live with the consequence. It's like, I would just like, yeah, I want to make the money of managing a thing, or I want to have the status of being the CEO, but I don't want to actually be responsible for who's impacted. Like, Steve Jobs wasn't going to the sweatshops where his phones are being made. He just want the check. He's like, I mean, it's real unfortunate that somebody's rounding up these kids and having them make little iPhones all day. But I mean, this check though, you know what I'm saying? They're like, I just don't want to see it. And so it's just like, I don't know. It's hard to be coming to an understanding that white people aren't getting the same education and experience that Black people are getting. And then, like, and I talk about this a little bit in my clip, but like, the simplicity of whiteness is so unimpressive, but the story is that it's the goal. Like, the school that I went to was the #1 education school in the United States at the time that I went. I've never been so underwhelmed. Never in my life have been so underwhelmed. I was like, this is trash. There's no depth. There's no nuance. There's no diversity. It's so sterile. So, like, if everything is black and white and clean, like, why would I be impressed that you can decipher black from white? That's very easy. Where's the nuance? And so, the people who don't value nuance were the same people writing the articles and doing the evaluations that ranked the school. So they're like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, this is really bad. And so I don't know, like, it's deep. There's just a lot to this conversation.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good segue to your clip. So why don't I'll stop sharing my screen here and let's share your clip and see where that goes.
How can we expect leaders to take into account all of the things that we're talking about if, like, I feel like our country runs on the false binary. It's like, well, it's either this or that. Either the Black people need to go to jail or they're just as good as the whites and they all need to be free. It's like, bro, first of all, there's not good and bad people. It's either you've thought about like how all of these things work together and you've eliminated your biases and you are like, okay, here's a good set of laws that is equitable, or you are super biased or you don't understand critical thought and you're like, oh, well, this is a problem I don't like, so I'm just going to make a law about it. And so, like, there is a lot here that is about people's ability because, like, we make systems. Systems only do what we tell them to do. And as you can think about Donald Trump, he could not think critically about a bag of French fries. Why is he making decisions about the country? That's inappropriate. When we talk about, my master's is in is in special education. The least restrictive environment. I don't know. He needs a few more restrictions because this ain't appropriate for him. It's not appropriate.
Least restrictive don't mean unrestricted,
man. And so, like, he need I just am seeing in terms of education. We have to be teaching our Black kids something other than this white ass curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Because white curriculum is trash. It is founded on binaries. It's founded on you either know this or you don't. It's founded on you either memorize the equation for the test or you didn't. We used to punish kids for finding different ways to do their math.
Yeah.
So what do you think
that.
we're going to do?
Okay. Here's a point that I think is worth discussing.
Mhm.
When you say white curriculum is trash, I think there is a significant portion of well-intentioned, well-educated white educators that are going to turn you off right in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, number one, like, are you aware of that when you say that? And then two, if it depends on the answer to that first question, but if you are aware of that, help make sense for those people, like what the purpose of saying that is, and what, what sense do you make out of people just turning you off in that moment?
So one of the things that I learned as a teacher is about the power of backwards design, and like the ability that it gives you to hold folks accountable and hold people to a high standard. So if by the end of the next 4 weeks, you need to be able to properly apply the quadratic formula to whatever scenario, real world math scenario, the bar doesn't change. Like, it doesn't matter if we are in day 1 of the unit or if we're in day 27 of the unit. By the end of the unit, you have to be able to use the quadratic formula. So the bar does not move. When you see the bar, when you're in day 1 of the unit, it's intimidating. It is hard to see all those numbers, and it may be the first big ass equation you've ever seen in your life, and you may not know anything about equations. You're gonna be scared. But guess what? You still gotta learn it. And guess what? A teacher is going to walk alongside, a good teacher is going to walk alongside you and support you in that learning, to the point where by the time we get to the test, you are no longer afraid. So if you hear the bar and you opt out, that's on you. Like, the bar is not going to change. The truth is, a binary curriculum that does not encourage critical thought, that doesn't encourage multiple perspectives, that reflects the false binary and simplicity that whiteness just loves to empower, that is trash. Like, it is what got us to this version of the life that we're living, and it is not going to get us to where we're trying to go. If you hear that and decide not to continue, that's up to you. Like, the way that I work as a teacher, whatever I say, there's gonna come the requisite support and explanation after that for you to get there. And so I don't have any qualms about telling the truth and then teaching people toward the truth. If you leave before the teaching, you didn't want it. That's how I feel. So, like, yeah, I'm very aware, but like, I'm also aware of the desire of a lot of white folks to be coddled in situations where they need to be told the truth, held accountable, and then supported toward living out that accountability. So, like, whenever you hear me talk, that is the format you're going to get. You're going to get, this is what you have to be able to do, and then I'm going to jump back and take you from where you are to how to get there. If you leave before then, this wasn't a class for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so what you mean by it's trash is, I think you just explained there and unpacked, which I think, a lot of the educators that I'm talking about, they could get there with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the challenge in my eyes is that, you know, we use a book called Thanks for the Feedback a lot, and it basically talks about how people resist feedback for one of three reasons, but a core reason they resist feedback is that it calls into question some aspect of their identity, which they're not willing to negotiate. And I think for a lot of well-intentioned white educators, that's what's at play here, which is that, you know, it reminds me a little bit of what that woman was saying in my clip, where she said, you know, she's talking about her two friends, and one of them was saying, like, trying to rationalize basically that her husband's life as a police officer also matters. And like, that makes sense, right? Why somebody would value the life of their significant other or their spouse. And but it also makes sense that juxtaposed, like when you're saying that, juxtaposed with something like Black Lives Matter, like a movement that is sort of unrelated to the value of your spouse, when you put those two things together, sort of changes the context of both of them.
Exactly.
And so, like, that to me seems like a real hurdle in this conversation. Like, it's like you're not attacking a white educator's identity. You're attacking what you believe to be lackluster curriculum and bad pedagogy. But this huge portion of white educators that, quite frankly, need to be involved in the conversation, what they hear is an attack on their identity as an educator. And that seems like a massive hurdle in this conversation.
Yeah, and I think I refer back to my previous point, is everything's hard till you practice it. So like, I'm not going to stop. So like, let's say we're a literal hurdle in a track meet. You don't try to jump it and trip over it and then go, all right, I'm going to go read a book about hurdles and never jump hurdles again. You just keep jumping hurdles. So like, that's what I'm going to bring it every time. And like, I'm also not going to package in this way. I am attacking your identity. Like, if you identify with white supremacy, when you talk to me, it is under scrutiny. I am not pulling any punches about that. I'm telling everybody when we show up, if you're a white supremacist, I'm questioning your identity. And then I'm going to ask you, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And then depending on your answer is how we proceed. So like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm not coming for a part of your identity. I'm just going to let you know and then ask you, do you want to participate? And I tell you, like, and once we're in that space, I've gotten the feedback many times that I do a good job of supporting people through difficult conversations about their identity. So like, the skills are here. The question is, are you going to confront your fear to practice something new?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, like so many things, right? I mean, we're not nervous about the experience of it. We're thinking about it ahead of time and then choosing to either engage or not engage. And so, I mean, you know, I think that's why it's so important to have this conversation, so that we can kind of get past the surface level fears and kind of get into it, you know. And one of my experiences has been the reality of the way that our society works is upsetting. And so I need to be comfortable with the fact that when I'm speaking with somebody, if they are really being honest with me, they're not happy. And so at least the schools that I've worked with and worked in, people are really uncomfortable with negative emotion. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's not really that allowed to be upset.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I think it brings up the question, like, what do you do with a conversation where someone's upset when you're not allowed to be upset?
So I'm actually doing a project that involves this right now. I'm working on a book club at a school for the book White Fragility. And Robin DiAngelo, I think is her name, does a really good job of, she has these 10 unspoken rules about how you're allowed to give white people feedback about race. And the first rule is don't give me feedback about race. And so it's like, what we're doing, well, we're about to do our first book club, and we're spending a lot of time. There's about 30 minutes dedicated to educating people, because we're almost the whole room is going to be white teachers. So we're doing this very intentional teaching to uncover, because like you said, a lot of folks don't make these connections about I'm not allowed to be angry. So we're going to introduce that to start with. It is common in white culture that these emotions are off the table. Anger, embarrassment, whatever they are. Here is how that's hurtful. This is not the place for that. And we're just going to teach them, and then we're going to practice hearing hard shit, getting mad, and pushing through it. Like, that's what good facilitators are for. That's what good relationship people are for, is to help guide you in the times where you can't guide yourself. That's what a teacher is for. I had a student in my last year at my previous school, 10 years old, could not read, could not spell his own name. And so, like, thank God we found out early, because like kids like Anthony are very good at hiding their lack of ability. And so we had to not only tell him that even though the last 5 years of your life, people have promised to teach you to read, we're actually going to teach you to read. And it was such a fight to get him to believe us, because he has 5 years of the opposite data. So one thing that I understand about people is that people who are conflict avoidant have many, many, many years of conflict leading to bad things. So when I facilitate conversations, or if I facilitate trainings, I put that on the table to start with. There are a lot of people in the world, there are a lot of people in this room who have a negative connotation with confrontation and difficult emotions. I am going to be here to support, because those things are coming up. There's no way we talk about this infuriating topic without someone getting infuriated. What I promise you is that you will not get hurt in this room, and you will learn social emotional skills that make us all better at communicating. So I just name it up front, and then it's an inherent part of my curriculum, because you can't do it without that.
What that makes me think of is, we started this conversation about the unspeakable being whiteness. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is where there's kind of a chicken and egg argument, because this shows up in all part of my work is not necessarily specific to race, but just difficult conversations in general. Mm-hmm. And this shows up in any context around anything difficult, which is that I actually think that is a core and central part of the culture of whiteness, is a sort of splitting off or separating the feelings of whether it's anger or conflict or whatever it is. Those things, we don't make space for those things in white culture. Mm-hmm. And because we don't make space for those things, I actually think that perpetuates the way in which it gets held inside of us as negative. Because I don't know what your experience is, Remington, but anything that is emotional or hard, for me, has an arc to it, right? And so when you go in and you feel it and it's hard, right, then it also comes down off that arc, and it sort of like is cathartic if you could let it go all the way through. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a huge part of being white where we never get to the top of that roller coaster, and we never come down.
Yeah.
And so that's horrible, and then it leads to what you're talking about, which is these people that have nothing but these horribly awkward and unfull experiences of some significant portion of their emotional life, trying to have a conversation with other people who have had a totally different experience. And I think a lot of what, and again, I don't know, I can't speak for white people, but I think a lot of white people don't want to talk about race because it's so painful. And not painful intellectually, but just painful, like you don't want to admit that the world is bad, or unfair, or you don't want to admit that there are systems and structures that privilege one group of people over another. Because the moment you admit that intellectually, right, you have to feel it. And I don't know, it's like whiteness is just not preparing people to feel those kinds of feelings and feel like they can survive.
Yeah. And I think we touched on this earlier about there's like this second coat of whiteness. Like when I go to the suburbs, I'm like, who thinks this is real? And the answer is everybody here. And I'm like, oh shit, that's why my job is so hard. It would be so different if you had to live with people who were different from you. That would make my job so much easier. But now I walk into a space trying to convince people I exist.
Well, that to me is the opportunity that we have in school.
Yes. If you don't buy yourself out of diverse schools.
So I guess that's an invitation to anyone watching this that, to try and find someone to at least have the conversation. And maybe that's the organizing prompt, which is, let's make this less unspeakable and let's use less of our intellect and more empathy and I guess more emotion.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have a parting thought for people in terms of what's next in terms of making it less unspeakable.
As you take on the challenge or the invitation that Ryan just gave, you are going to find yourself inadequate. If you have been a person who has avoided practicing hard, emotional, irrational conversations, which I think covers a large majority of people and an even larger majority of white people. So don't be hard on yourself if this is hard, and it will be hard, because it's unpracticed. And just know, as long as you don't die, you can try again. It's gonna be embarrassing. It's gonna be hard. You might cry. You should leave these conversations unsettled, unearthed, because I wake up every day in my own house unsettled in the American South. And I'm better for that. I don't have the luxury of getting comfortable with how America is. And I ask that white people would opt out of that luxury, because this is not a good place. It's not good for everybody. It's not well put together. If you live somewhere that enforces that this is a good place to live, I challenge you to take this invitation, because I got a whole lifetime that says the opposite. And I assume we're going to meet somewhere in the middle if we both do the work.
Yeah, I think that's a nice segue too, that for those of you watching this that are interested, Leadership and Design is partnering with Remington Holt Consulting to create an in-depth exploration, really, of 3 different modules for schools and leadership teams that are interested in not just doing a checkmark PD, but really interested in tackling the culture in their school around this conversation. And Remington, I would, if you wouldn't mind, just tell people about the 3 modules. And obviously, if people want to find out more, they can check it out on your website or on our website.
Yeah. So we're putting together what's called the Racial Immersion Experience. It's comprised of 3 modules. The first module being identity, and identity and culture. The second module being about relationships, and the third module being about systems of change. And the heart behind this is, first, this work starts with yourself, confronting the things that have been unspeakable within you and around you, and like, how has that impacted your identity? Once you understand or have some foundation of those things, you then move to, how has my identity impacted how I relate to others and how I relate to the world? And then, for folks who haven't done this work, at the end of module 1 and 2, you're going to feel every range of emotions that there is. You're going to be mad that you didn't know this stuff about yourself. You're going to be happy that now you know. You're going to see all these places to make improvements in your relationships in life. And then to like kind of top all of that off, there's the final module of, so now what do I do to change the world that's around me? And that's the systems module. And all of these modules are experienced through this lens of media and diverse writings and things of that nature that open up your eyes to yourself, to your relationship to others, and to America as a whole and as a set of systems, and just kind of help us find a pathway to tread toward change in terms of race and identity and culture in the United States.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And so if people want to find out more about that, you can check that out. But we've called it Racial Immersion on purpose, which is that we really want it to be about practice. We don't just want to like think about ideas. We really want to immerse ourselves in the conversation. And it's not really for everyone. I don't know that, so I think that if you're watching this and your school really wants to tackle this kind of at a level of depth that includes that emotional level, I think maybe, you'd want to find out more. But Remington, thanks so much. I mean, obviously, we didn't even scratch the surface, and I didn't even get to my 3rd clip, but I think that's another great thing about the program, is that it's filled with media and things like that, where people are able to relate to this issue through a variety of different lenses. And so I look forward to the next chapter.
Same. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, take care.